Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening or watching. So I'm Daniel Nachtigall, and in the next couple minutes, I will present you the first ideas of the upcoming Climate Policy Action Index, the CPA. And before I start, let me just say that it's joint work with my colleagues Miguel Cardenas Rodriguez, Luisa Lutz, and Ivan Hasic. And let me also say that it's still work in progress. So everything that is presented here may change in the coming month once we have new data and we integrate comments from internal and external experts. So what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes is to first have a few words on IPAC and the preliminary IPAC dashboard to see where the CPA fits actually into the program. Then talk about the objectives and the purposes of the CPA, the approach and data sources, and finally present the conceptual framework, which will be like the major part of the presentation. So just a few words on the OECD International Program for Action on Climate, or short IPAC. So it supports country progress towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions and a more resilient economy by 2050. And IPAC was launched in May 2021. And as you can see here in the screen, it has four big components. So the dashboard of climate-related indicators, the annual climate action monitor, country notes, and the online interactive platform for dialogue and mutual learning. And it's still work in progress, so not all components are finalized yet. For more information, I would also like you to check out the OECD IPAC webpage, that you can see at the bottom of the screen. And the CPA is actually one of the indicators of the IPAC dashboard. So how does the IPAC dashboard looks like? So the dashboard features key indicators to track progress towards climate objectives and provide a snapshot of countries' climate action. And by and large, it has three areas. So first, emissions, impacts and risks, and actions and opportunities. And so the CPA will be one indicator in the area actions and opportunities. So what is actually the CPA and what are the objectives and purposes? So the CPA is a composite indicator that measures climate policy action comprehensively across a wide range of policy areas and instruments. So for example, market-based, non-market-based, and technology support instruments. It allows to track progress of countries' climate action based on factual information. And it's also like a modular and a stepwise approach that covers national sectoral, national cross-sectoral, and international climate policy. And it's actually stepwise because different modules will be available at different times, as we'll see in a bit. Then it also allows for identifying areas with higher or lower climate policy action within and across countries. And finally, it allows to carry out empirical analysis to assess policy effectiveness. And that empirical analysis would also allow to draw policy recommendations for climate policy making. So how does the CPA compare to existing indices that try to measure environmental or climate policy action? So what we did first was to carry out a literature review, and we identified three indices that first are able to track policy progress across time, and second have been widely used in the literature to evaluate policy effectiveness. So the first one is Yale's and Columbia's Environmental Performance Index, EPI. So here 13 out of the 32 indicators are related to climate change, but the focus is more on the state of the environment rather than on policies. And so that would roughly correspond to the impact category of the IPAC dashboard. So the second one is the CCPI, the Climate Change Policy Index. So here all indicators are actually climate related. 20% of them are perception-based, so essentially expert reviews or expert opinions, and 80% are output-based, for example, trends in greenhouse gas emissions or energy use. So that roughly corresponds to the category emissions of the IPAC dashboard. The next category or the next indicator is the Environmental Policy Stringency Index. So here 8 out of the 15 indicators are actually climate related, and it covers factual climate policy. So for example, the level of emission limit values in selected economic sectors, and it clearly falls into the category of action or opportunities of the IPAC dashboard. And so finally, how does the CPA compare to those three indicators? So in the CPA, we have more than 30 climate-related policy indicators, and as such, the CPA will be the most comprehensive climate-related composite indicator out there for the time being. And we also try to capture the most relevant policies. But of course, we need to bear in mind that there are limitations in terms of data availability. So what we do essentially is we follow the methodology of the EPS, and we focus on actual policy action of countries, so not on outcomes that are the result of policy action. So for example, we would include the public RD&D expenditure in low carbon technologies, but we would not include the number of green patents that are filed in a country, which are actually a result of the RD&D spending. So in contrast to the EPS, the CPA excludes non-climate environmental policies, but therefore it expands the measurement of climate policies towards more sectors and policy areas. And furthermore, it also goes clearly beyond carbon emissions and includes policies on non-CO2 emissions. So on the data sources, we source data from the OECD and its sister organizations, so the International Energy Agency, the Nuclear Energy Agency, and the International Transport Forum. And we also have external, internationally recognized and validated data sets. So now let me come to the conceptual framework. So we envision the CPA to have three broad building blocks: national sectoral policies, national cross-sectoral policies, and international policies. And let me first go through the color code here. So green, the color code green means that it will be available by the end of this year. The yellow means that it will be available towards the second quarter of 2022. And red means that it will be available in the long term, meaning somewhere in between 2023 and 2024. And let me also say that those color labels are actually a preliminary assessment, so that can also change in the coming weeks. So on the sectoral policies, so we cover 6 large emitting sectors that jointly account for more than 90% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So the power sector, the industry sector, building sector, transport, agriculture, and waste. And we distinguish between non-market-based instruments and market-based instruments. So in the power sector, there are, for example, we will envision to have bans on new coal power plant and phase outs of coal plants. In the industry and building sectors, we will have minimum energy performance standards for electric motors, buildings, and appliances. In transport, we envision to have emission limit values for passenger cars or expenditure of rail versus road infrastructure. And agriculture, for example, regulation of synthetic fertilizer use or other environmental regulation. On the market-based instruments, it's primarily carbon pricing, so fuel excise taxes, carbon taxes, and emission trading schemes. And the emission trading schemes would also, or most of them would also actually cover non-CO2 greenhouse gases. But then we have also go beyond carbon pricing and capture some other market-based instruments, for example, renewable energy support in power or CO2-based car taxation and transport. And in the long term, we are also envisioning to have landfill and incineration taxes and waste. So the next building block, national cross-sectoral policies. So here we have 5 different modules. So targets, there we will have the state and the coverage of net zero targets, and also the distance to NDC target, which is actually one of the indicators of the IPAC dashboard. On public RD&D support, we are planning to have to distinguish between 3 categories, so energy efficiency, renewables, and other non-fossil fuel technologies. Then climate legislation and governments, that would include, for example, whether or not there is an independent advisory body in a country. And then finally, we have 2 modules where data is not yet readily available. So that is CO2 removals and avoidance. So for example, afforestation and deforestation targets, and also greening the financial system. So whether green finance taxonomy has been developed. And the last building block, international policies. So here data availability is rather good. So the first module, UNFCCC submissions, covers, for example, the UNFCCC Secretariat's evaluation of the completeness and transparency of the biennial reports or biennial update reports. And we also cover whether key documents have been submitted to the UNFCCC, for example, national communications or biennial reports or update reports. Then the second module, international climate cooperation. So that's kind of participation in international climate fora, such as the Climate and Clean Air Coalition or Powering Past Coal Alliance. And finally, the last module is international climate finance. So here we have one indicator that's climate-related official development assistance. So with that, I'd like to close the presentation. Thanks a lot for watching. If you want to have more information on IPAC, really go to the webpage of IPAC that you can see here. If you have any further question or suggestion, just drop me a line, daniel.nachtigall@oecd.org. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.